we're going to jump into this. Hopefully, did everybody, well, I say did everybody. I know some of you won't have got my email because I don't have your emails yet. But although we've had chapter 28 read to us, we're looking at the life of Jacob, which is actually chapters 25 to 31. Or this week, and then actually it continues. So next week, we're looking at the second part of Jacob's story, which is another few chapters. So it's like 31 through to, if I remember rightly, 37, I think, or 38. 38. We'll go. Oh no, 37. Up to 30. I should have written this down. 31 to 36, end of 36, start of 37. We're going to be doing some wrestling today, no pun intended, because it is Jacob after all, the third of the fourth patriarchs. And now, if I'm going to be honest with you, Jacob is a character I struggle with. And I find it remarkable that he's one of the patriarchs, to be honest, and he's somebody that we look back on and go like, this guy's awesome. Because when you read his story, he's not so awesome, really isn't. So let's pray, and we'll dig into this and see what we can pull out of it, shall we? So, Father, thank you that your word is full of people and characters, and it's not just whitewashed. It's not the problems, the faults, the issues that we have. They're not just whitewashed. They're not just covered over. They're not just, it's not just all about the good bits. But Lord, there's also the things that we struggle with, and it's just warts and all. And so, Father, thank you that this is true and a trustworthy and full account that we can rest into and wrestle with and look at and ask questions and play with and discover more of you about. So Jesus, won't you open our eyes and our hearts and our ears this morning that we would be led by the Spirit in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. So I've mentioned before that one of the places that I've been connecting with and is sort of shaped and influenced, my thoughts and my way of approaching the Old Testament is the teachings of Rabbi David Foreman, who's an Orthodox Jew. He's not a believer; he's an Orthodox Jew, but he is a world leader on the Torah, and that's, he's absolutely amazing. And go check out he's got podcasts and stuff like that if you want to get like really deep into Hebrew and stuff like that. It's called Aleph Beta. It's brilliant, and incredibly thought-provoking and challenging. But even listening to his stuff on Jacob has left me with a real sense of disquiet about this character. I kind of thought, we'll get some resolution here from an Orthodox perspective. But actually, he just kind of goes like, yeah, this guy's a challenge, to say the least. And I think it's because when you read through his story, we see how much of a user and usurper Jacob is. He really is, isn't he? He uses people for his own gain, his own source. And if I was to ask you what Jacob means, I think that most of you would probably say deceiver, wouldn't you? That's what we've been taught over the years. Jacob means deceiver, blah, 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 blah. And we tend to not ask many questions because it fits with the narrative of the story of Jacob. Because Jacob deceives a lot of people throughout his story. But really, Jacob actually means heel grabber. If you go back to chapter 25 and you read his story, that's how he's born holding onto the heel of his brother Esau. And we kind of let that... we kind of just lump him with the idea of that he's a deceiver, but as much as I struggle with him, there is something positive that I want to pull out from this chunk of scripture. That I do struggle with him, but there are redeeming moments. But please know, I have always struggled with this guy as I've read scripture and continue to do so. There's people in the Bible I'm like, yeah, I'd like to meet them. I would really like to meet them. Jacob, not so much. Not so much. And I don't want to be like jumping on, piling on, being unkind and all that sort of thing. I'm sure one day in the kingdom, I'd love to have a conversation beer. I would just watch my glass. Make sure that it's, we're drinking the same stuff. Because ultimately, Jacob is a person who God changes his name to Israel. And we still have this nation that's called Israel, that's named after this guy. So there is something redeemable. There is something amazing, because he is the father of a nation. So we're going to walk through the first part of his life today, and we're going to start in chapter 25. I'm going to read a little bit to you. So if you've got a Bible there and you want to flip over, or you can just listen, we'll start to dig in. It starts at verse 19 of chapter 25. It says this: "This is the account of a family line of Abraham's son Isaac. Abraham became the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel the Aramean from Paran Aram, and the sister of Laban the Aramean. Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was childless. The Lord answered his prayer, and his wife Rebekah became pregnant. The babies jostled each other within her, and she said, 'Why is this happening to me?' So she went to inquire of the Lord. The Lord said to her, 'Two nations are in your womb, and the two peoples from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger.' When the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. The first came out was red, and his whole body was like a hairy garment." What a way to describe a baby. So they named him Esau. After this, his brother came out with his hand grasping Esau's heel, so he was named Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when Rebekah gave birth to them. The boys grew up, and Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the open country, while Jacob was content to stay at home among the tents. Isaac, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Once, when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau came in from the open country, famished. He said to Jacob, "Quick, let me have some of that red stew. I'm famished." That is why he was also called Edom. I am assuming Edom means famished. I should have checked that out, but there we are. Pardon me? Means red, does it? Look at that. Someone's got a thing there, a little side note. Jacob replied, "First, sell me your birthright. Look, I'm about to die." Slightly dramatic. "What good is this birthright to me?" But Jacob said, "Swear to me first." So he swore an oath to him, selling his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau some bread and some lentil stew. He ate and drank and then got up and left. So Esau despised his birthright. Now, we haven't really talked about birthrights very much up to this point, but one of the things that happens in the ancient patriarchal culture is that you would always have a firstborn son. Always have a firstborn son. And in Hebrew, they would call that the Behor. Now, the Behor is a firstborn, and he is responsible to carry on the legacy of the father. That's what his job is to do. So whatever the father does, whatever he stands for, whoever he is, this son is going to carry on the trait, carry on the job. And the Behor gets a double portion of the inheritance. So if there's 3 sons, the inheritance is split 4 ways, and the Behor gets 2 portions. Now you kind of go, but that's unfair. But actually, what happens is that the Behor is responsible not just for himself, not just for his family, but he's responsible for the widow. He's responsible for any unmarried daughters. He's responsible for any aunts that have been adopted into the family. He's responsible for the whole household. So having the double portion, yes, he gets more stuff, but he also gets a heck of a lot more responsibility. Twice a blessing, twice a responsibility. So by this point of the story, we've encountered two generations, Abraham and Isaac. And we actually said last week that the promises that were made to Abraham are starting to be fulfilled in the story of Isaac. If you remember, we talked about how Isaac redeemed the failings in Abraham, and we started to see him come and take possession of this promised land. And now the story is being passed on to a new generation, and it is meant to be passed on to Esau. That's the reality of it. Esau was born first. Jacob comes out grabbing hold of his heel. Esau is the Behor. And we're told that they are very different. Esau is kind of like a man's man. He likes to hunt and get all dirty and sweaty, and and we're told he's hairy all over from birth. I can kind of relate to that, although it's not so much anymore. And he likes his meat, and he's his father's favorite because his father looks at him and goes, "You, my boy, are a man." And we're also told that Jacob is completely the opposite. He likes to hang out at home. He likes to be in the tents. Do you know who are in the tents? Women. Patriarchal society, fight patriarchy. I can't even say it this morning. Fight the patriarchy. But that's where they were. He is a mommy's boy. And Rebecca has a special place in her heart for Jacob. He is a homebody. And as the story progresses, we get this strange bit of a story where Esau has been out hunting, and when he comes home, Jacob is just perfectly placed with this stew cooking. And though through the course of the story we read that Esau sells his birthright for a bowl of lentil stew. It's not even meat stew. This guy who likes meat, it says in this narrative that he likes meat. He sells his birthright for a bowl of lentils. I like lentil curry. I don't think I would sell my inheritance for one. And you may be thinking, yeah, we've read this before. We kind of get this. Esau's a bit of a dummy to do this, but what's the big deal? He's just a bit of a moron, really, that he's doing this. But what we don't realize is for Esau to care so little about the birthright is such a shock. This would be like scandalous in ancient Near Eastern culture. It would be completely scandalous. Esau is the one who is meant to pick up the mantle of the promises of God. He's like, who cares? Just give me stew. Being the Behor in this culture isn't typically seen as a burden. It's a real honor and privilege that you are the firstborn, that this lot has fallen on you. But Esau treats it with real contempt. Whereas Jacob wants the honor. He wants to be the Behor. He wants to be the one who, is going to make a difference. And I mean, at this point, Jacob isn't trying to get anything other than to be the one who takes on the responsibility to fulfill the plans and purposes of God. Yes, he'll get a double blessing, but when the time comes, he'll also have a whole heap of responsibility. He's simply wanting the opportunity to bring about influence. That's what he wishes for. That's what he wants. So much that he's willing to steal it from his brother. This is what he's basically doing. A normal brother would just go, you're home. Here, have some stew. You must be hungry. That's how families look after each other. But no. What he does is he uses it to steal away this birthright. So we're going to walk through the next few chapters, and we're going to skip over chapter 26, because if you remember, we looked at that last week. So if you flip and flick forward to 27, hopefully you've some of you will have read this. If not, go back, read it, have a look at it afterwards. But we're going to pick up a story where we find this situation that is orchestrated by Rebecca, where she sends Jacob in to see his dad. And we're told that by this point, Isaac is old and blind. So Rebecca sends in Jacob dressed in sheep's skins, so he's hairy like his brother. And he gets Jacob to wear Esau's clothes, so he smells like him. And he gets Jacob to cook some game, just like Isaac likes it, in order to fool this old man. Now, I wish we had more details in this story. I really do. I wish that we had the conversations that went on between mom and son, so that we could know more about the planning process. Because it appears that Rebecca is just as deceitful as Jacob in this story. She's setting up her husband. I don't know how many of you would. I think I would be a bit mad at Annie if she did that to me. And it does make me wonder, did Jacob get his deceitfulness from his mom? Is this part of her character? You know, we talked last week about things that are passed down generations to generations. And I wonder if Jacob learned how to be cunning and deceitful by hanging around the tents where his mom is. Or is it because Rebecca has been told by God who is going to serve who, and she knows how the story is supposed to go, and so she's trying to make something happen? Again, we talked about this a little bit through Abraham, didn't we, where God reveals something and we try and force things to happen. And I wonder, did she share what God had told her with Isaac or not? We don't have this in the text, but I do wonder about it. I wonder if she did tell Isaac, and if he reacted in such a way that led her to believe that there was absolutely no way he was going to shame his firstborn, Esau, by not making him the Behor. I wonder if he was just like, it doesn't matter. He's the firstborn. He's the Behor. He's the one who gets a blessing. Did Rebecca have to battle and fight in order to get God's promises that she had received when she was pregnant? And I just wish we kind of had a little bit more detail, because there's lots of questions in that, isn't there? They're not that big a deal, really, but they are things to kind of wrestle with. Because it's an interesting relationship, we get this like magnifying glass on the family. And so we kind of got to ask, okay, how does all this work? And what does it mean? And actually, how does it impact? Because we kind of brush over all of this, and we kind of think it's perfect. But we can see that the backstory isn't. There's lots of questions here. I mean, regardless of how it played out, to hear something from the Lord and have that much confidence in it, like Rebecca appears to have, to actually make it happen is pretty serious, isn't it? She's going completely against culture because of the promises she believes God has made to her about her sons. But also put yourself in Isaac's place. Even if you and your wife have this amazing relationship, which is perfect in every way, and she says to you, listen, I've had this word from God right back when I was pregnant, and it's Jacob over Esau. I do think that Isaac would be like, really? Really? That kid? He's such a mummy's boy. Him over Esau? I mean, the world is going to expect the promises of God to go into the hands of the one who's got it all together. And in that culture, that's one of those brothers. That's Esau. Esau is the hunter. He's the one who's strong and manly and can defend everybody. He's the one who plays it safe as well. He does what he's told. Whereas when we look over at Jacob and see his immaturity and his duplicity and compare his character to the nature and character of God, there is no way at all you'd pick him. No way whatsoever. How much faith does it take from Rebecca to go, I don't care. God told me it's Jacob. So let's see how this plays out. So Rebecca sends him in to see his dad, and hopefully you read him a passage or are familiar with it and know that Jacob is able to trick his blind old dad, and we kind of feel sorry for Isaac at this point. And he receives a blessing that was meant for his older brother. In our culture, I think most of us kind of think, so what? Isaac can just take it back, and it's only words. Who cares? And one of the things that we don't understand is that in the Eastern Hebrew culture, words have real power. And these blessings have been purposefully and prayerfully crafted over years and years and years. And Isaac will have carefully crafted these blessings, one for each son, which he believed were given to him by God. These blessings were about what the future holds for them. Now, if I said to you, sticks and stones may break my bones, but how would you finish that? What? Names never hurt me, but words will never hurt me. You see, for us, words are just words. They hold no power. Power is truth. Words are just empty conduits that hold no real power by themselves. Truth is power. We're like, so who cares what you say? We know it's not true. So it holds no power. But in the ancient Near East, words are power. A Jew would take us right back to Genesis 1 and say, God spoke the world into being. He used words to create. So once a blessing has been uttered by Isaac, once it has been spoken over someone, he can't, in his world, just take it back. And I would suggest that actually that's something that we need to grasp and understand for ourselves. That the words we speak, even today, have power. I really believe that. You know, we crafted some blessings to speak over our community, which I hope some of you still do. I still do. But I think actually bring transformation because we're speaking life into the world. It's a way of praying. You know, if we don't believe that words have power, why pray? Words change stuff. We don't have to be perfect either. You know, there's this amazing thing that happens where God sanctifies our prayers and transforms them into where we may feel powerless. He transforms them into power. But that's a whole nother sermon which we'll get onto one day. In this instance, words have gone forth, and those words have a job to do. They have come from God, and they are going to do their work. Words have an effect on this world. So Isaac gives the blessing to the wrong son. And Esau comes in, and the mistaken identity is recognized, and Esau weeps bitterly because he wants a blessing that he now can't get. And he's going to receive the blessing that is intended not for the Behor, but for the second son. So let's move on to chapter 28. Jacob gets this blessing, and he ends up having to run because things aren't going to work out for him. He runs away. And it's what comes from being shrewd and crafty in a deceitful way. Your methods really do matter to the outcome. I don't know how many, who likes to hang around with shrewd and crafty people who are deceitful as well. There's nothing wrong with being shrewd and crafty. In fact, actually, there are times where we're told to be shrewd and crafty, but not lie, not be deceitful, not to play tricks on people. So Jacob takes off, and he only has one place to go. And there is typically only one place that this family goes when it needs something, and they go to the other side of the family tree. They go to Nahor's house, the other son of Terah, and he goes to the house of Laban in this instance. And Laban is the grandson of Nahor in the same way that Isaac is the grandson of Abraham. Now, one of the things to point out is that Laban is just as crafty and deceitful as Jacob. Jacob has met his match in coming into contact with Laban, which is interesting because it shows that both of these family lines face the same character challenges. But before he gets to Laban, on his journey, we encounter this dream episode that we've had read to us. And it's interesting because the text says that when he reaches a certain place, and in the Hebrew, I'm told, and I've sort of done a little bit of a work, that the inference is that this place is being best described as this completely desolate place, a forgotten place. It's in the middle of nowhere. That's one of the ways that you can translate it. This is a place that's in the middle of nowhere. So not just the middle of nowhere, but nowhere. And it's kind of like a redundant nothingness. It's a Hebrew way of saying that there is nothing significant about this place that he's at. I wonder how many of us kind of feel like that sometimes, that we're in places that there's no significance, or we hold no significance, or maybe we live in a forgotten part of the world, and it's may not be true for Washington, or other places, but I'm fairly confident that there are people who go like, "Oh, this place is a forgotten place. There's nothing here." And Jacob ends up falling asleep with his head on a rock, and he has a dream, which I find amazing, how you can fall asleep with a head on a rock. I think if I fell asleep with a head on a rock, I would have some quite vivid dreams. Pretty much about why my ear is hurting. And when he wakes from this dream, we get this amazing statement. God was in this place, and I was not even aware of it. And it's like an awakeness to the awareness of God's presence and work in the world, no matter where we're at. This is what is being driven at here, that we can see God at work and marvel at it all if we only open our eyes to see. He is at work in all places, including the nowheres of this world. So we move on to chapter 29, and Jacob arrives in Padam Aram, and he meets Laban, and Laban has two daughters, Leah and Rachel. Now, Leah means tired eyes, which in Hebrew is kind of a way of saying, "You ugly." It's really sorry. Anybody got Leah as a second name? No? Anybody know any Leahs? It's sorry, so very sorry, but that's what it means. Leah means tired eyes, which is a way of saying not very attractive. It's a bit unkind, really, isn't it? Sorry for any Leahs watching or catching up or stumbling across this little clip. But then there is Rachel, who's a cutie. And so Jacob decides that he wants to marry Rachel, and Laban agrees if Jacob will work for 7 years for him, which is the appropriate amount of time, by the way. This is like a covenantal agreement, so it's an appropriate amount of time. I love the fact that nowadays there's if you was engaged to somebody for 7 years, people would be like, "Well, why don't you just marry her?" He says the guy who was married a year to the day of meeting his wife, could not wait. If Stan, my father-in-law, went, "Yeah, you can marry Annie, but you've got to come work for me for 7 years," I'd be like, "But I can't draw." He's a draftsman, And now what I love about this is that Jacob has run to the house of Nahor and met his match, because this is a pure setup. Because Jacob he works for these 7 years, and there's a wedding as agreed, but Laban gives him Leah as a bride instead, and Laban's like, "Oh, well, so sorry, culture. How can I marry my youngest daughter to you before my oldest daughter is married? So there you go. You're married to her now. And by the way, you've already slept with her, so, can't take it back because you've deflowered her. And that just wouldn't be cool. So Jacob decides that he still wants to marry Rachel, even though he's been married off to Leah, and agrees to another 7 years of working with Laban, or for Laban. And it's really clear that Laban is a match for Jacob in every single way. And it plays out through chapter 30 as well. And we get this strange competition going on between them. Who can outdo the other the most? And it starts with Jacob being 1-0 down, being tricked into marrying Leah and having to have children with her. But he makes this deal with Laban after he realizes that he is going to have to strike out on his own and leave after finishing off these 7 years. And so he tells Laban his intention to go, and Laban says, you can't go because I don't have anything to give you. Again, it's a cultural thing. If you was to set off, and the father would give them stuff to make sure that they were set up for life. I have nothing for you to give you for success. And so Jacob comes up with this idea, and he tells Laban, I've worked for you all these years, and with all my strength, just give me a portion of your flock. I'll tell you what, I'll take this group of sheep, the striped, the speckled, and the spotted ones. You can have the rest. And Laban thinks, that's great, because, actually, that's the lesser amount, because they're more rare. I don't know how many of you see sheep. Being across in the lakes for a number of years, we saw a lot of sheep. In fact, we love sheep. We've got pictures of sheep in our bedroom, and because they're cute, and we like sheep. But most of them aren't. It's the cuter ones are the speckled ones, or the spotted ones, or the striped ones, because they look different, look a bit different. And then we get this weird bit where Jacob waters the sheep. With these branches sort of stuck around them. And it's like, what on earth is going on here? There's just this weird stuff happening that because of the way that he feeds them water at the trough with these branches all around, which are striped or speckled or spotted branches, that as these sheep give birth to other sheep, to lambs, they are born with stripes or spots or speckles. And it's like, what on earth is going on? But the root of the issue is this. God is behind it. God is doing something. He's behind this provision. It's a weird thing. Sometimes God asks us to do weird stuff or chooses to use our weird stuff. And there's provision brought into it. So finally, Jacob takes off, and his family, after Laban's attitude changes towards him. And I mean, he is always going to wear out his welcome, this guy, isn't he? Because actually, Laban feels tricked. He doesn't quite know how he's been tricked, but he feels he's been tricked. And it's what happens, really, this kind of wearing out your welcome with people, when we have tactics like Jacob's in our lives. I'm fairly confident we can all kind of look back on our lives and go oh yeah, I got fed up of X, Y, Z person, and they just needed to be out of my life. Or, if we're honest, maybe there's been times where we've gone oh yeah, actually, I had to disappear from that person's life because of the way that I treated them, and this is holding a bit of a mirror up to us. What Jacob doesn't know, though, is that Rachel has taken her father's idols. And now we know that the difference between the two strands of and now we know the difference between the two strands of Terah's family, the Abraham line and the Nahor line. And it's also gives a bit of an indication of why it's so important for Abraham that his son Isaac didn't go back to Nahor to find a wife. Why? He sent his servant, if you remember, but he said, don't take my son. If no one's willing to come back, you've got your freedom, but don't take my son there. Because we can conclude that although these people are cut from the same cloth character-wise, they still have idols in their lives. They still worship other gods. They may know of Yahweh, but they also worship other gods. So we can conclude that whatever their God worship looks like, this other section of the family hasn't given up their idols, which makes them different to the uniqueness of Abraham and his family. So Rachel steals her father's idol, and Jacob doesn't know anything about it. And when Laban catches up to them to reclaim their gods, Rachel sits on the idol on a cushion and pretends to be on her period, which would ensure that they didn't make her move, because she would have been ritually unclean and you didn't bother women and stuff. And so she ends up successfully hiding these idols, and this will come back next week. So it's a really important thing to remember, because we'll come back to this next week, because Jacob basically says to Laban, if anybody's got your idols, then they'll die. I promise nothing, we haven't done anything, we don't know, nothing, of course nobody's took him, and the punishment will be death if anybody has. And Rachel's kind of sat there a little bit uncomfortably. And it's like this battle between liars and deceivers comes to a culmination at the end of chapter 31. And we decide that they have to do something to resolve the issues between them. Because Laban knows that his idols are missing, and it's really important to him, and Jacob doesn't know anything about it. So he can't put the issue right, but there is this impasse. So let's pick up the end of everything at the end of chapter 31 and see what happens. It says this from verse 43. It says this: Laban answered Jacob, the women are my daughters, the children are my children, and the flocks are my flocks. All you see is mine. Yet what can I do today about these daughters of mine, or about the children they have borne? Come now, let's make a covenant, you and I, and let it serve as a witness between us. So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. He said to his relatives, gather some stones. So they took stones and piled them in a heap, and they ate there by the heap. Laban called it Yagar Shahadaphah, and Jacob called it Gilead. Laban said, the heap as a witness between you and me today. This is why it was called Gilead. It was also called Mizpah, because he said, may the Lord keep watch between you and me when we are away from each other. If you mistreat my daughters, or if you take any wives beside my daughters, even though no one is with us, remember that God is a witness between you and me. Laban also said to Jacob, here is a heap, and here is a pillar I have set up between you and me. This heap is a witness, and this pillar is a witness, but I will not go past this heap to your side to harm you, and that you will not go past this heap and pillar to my side to harm me. May the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us. So Jacob took an oath in the name of the fear of his father Isaac. He offered a sacrifice there on the hill country and invited his relatives to a meal. And after they had eaten, they spent the night there. Early the next morning, Laban kissed his grandchildren and his daughters and blessed them. Then he left and returned home. Did you note that they set up this heap of stones and then ate together? And this is significant because it indicates that their problems are resolved. You don't eat with your enemies or people that you argue with in that culture at all. But there are a couple more things to note about this story as we sort of come to a bit of an end. Typically, there would be only one pillar and one heap, because they're making a promise between themselves, a covenant. But here, there are two. And we have to, because Laban is basically saying that whatever they are promising on isn't good enough. So he makes another pillar and another heap, and he swears another covenant. But Laban really hedges his bets, because he makes his covenant in the name of the God of Abraham and the gods of Nahor. And so this reconciliation isn't really much of a reconciliation at all. Because when you look at the names that are given to the place, Yagar Shaduf, my dodgy Yorkshire Hebrew, and Gilead, they are actually two totally different languages. Gilead is Hebrew. Yagar, can't even do it now. Shahavufa, whatever, is a more Semitic language, possibly Aramaic, but there's a lot of debate about that. The point is that they've spent 20 years together, and they speak the same language. They can communicate to each other perfectly well, but they choose to use different languages. They choose to speak differently to one another to set up this covenant. That's just weird, isn't it? Like, why would you do that? They can speak, they can communicate, they can talk perfectly fine to each other, but really they're just so at odds. They're kind of like doing this through gritted teeth. See, the question really should be is, are they really speaking different languages? Well, I actually don't think they probably are, really. They may use different names. We'll grant them that, because that's what's in the Bible. But it's the author's way of drawing out a point. And I want to end here on this big point, because we're only halfway through Jacob's story, and it's a terrible place to end, really. But I've really gone on for long enough. And I think actually this will help us springboard into the rest of his story. Why does God choose to work through this guy? Why Jacob? He is such a usurper, such a deceiver. Why would God choose him? So if you remember way back at the start of this, there were two sons to choose from, Jacob and Esau. And do you really know that God might not make the same choices that the world would make when it comes to people and character? I think that this story shows us that if God is to make choices about who he is going to use to build his kingdom, he is going to use the one with fire in his belly, or her belly, their belly. He is going to pick the one who wants it, who's prepared to struggle and fight and contend. The other one may play by the rules, may do all the right things, may look perfect, look strong and big and stuff like that. And the world may think, oh, that's the right choice, that's the safe choice, that's the person. Of course they're going to be doing that. But really deep down, they just don't care. They're just people who kind of go through the motions. See, God is going to partner with the one with fire in their belly. The Jewish word for it is chutzpah. God knows that the kingdom that he wants to build on earth, the redemptive nature, the value of the kingdom, means that we need to be prepared to contend for it. There needs to be a light in our hearts, a fire that burns within us. And we need to be prepared to dig for it, to contend for it, to push for it, do everything that it takes to bring it into reality. God is much more able to steer a moving target and change our methods. It's easier for God to give us selflessness over selfishness, humility instead of pride, generosity instead of greed. It's much easier to change the course of a moving object and change the details than it is to light a fire inside of someone, to move somebody from ambivalence to power and passion. And I think that this gives us real hope for a lot of us for different times in our lives, or maybe looking around at our families and friends, and maybe we're going through a season like Jacob at the moment. Maybe you read these chapters and you're like, heck, I'm a Jacob. There's things I do in my life which just aren't, they're not great, they're not good. But I take great hope in the story of Jacob. If you've got a fire in your belly, God wants it, and God will use it. Maybe not always how we think he will, but he will take it and use it and build his kingdom. It won't always be pleasant as well, because do you know what? He's going to shape and mold us. He's not going to leave us in a place where we are deceivers, where we are using unscrupulous ideas and thoughts and processes to get our way. And we can see throughout this story, we have to be prepared to stick with it in the shaping and the molding stages as well as the good stages. The 7 years of working to end up with Leah, the person who you don't want to marry, and then having to do another 7 years to get the one you want, you kind of think, well, that's really unjust. But there's times where there is injustice. But ultimately, when the Lord sees his people with fire in their bellies and hope in their eyes, he's like, yes, I can use them. They're the people I can partner with. They're the ones I can bring about my kingdom and my purposes. So that's the hope I want to leave you with today. God is always on the lookout for partners, and we see in the life of Jacob this character, this guy who's just a liar at times, and a deceiver and a usurper. But we're not done. Part 2 next week.